Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
that looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
With something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. The Pacific Island culture is an important element of the Pacific Northwest identity, but the story behind the migration is often one of pain, the result of colonial domination, the loss of supportive family and friends, the need to adapt to an unfamiliar culture. Gay and trans Pacific Islanders face particularly difficult challenges. UTOPIA Washington is a group that advocates for their needs. In this program, we'll explore the challenges they face and what the larger Pacific Northwest community can do to help them. So we're delighted to have as our guest on this edition of Challenge, Ang'aiotupu Vienna. Ang'aiotupu, it's so good to have you with us. Thank you for making time in your schedule. I know you just had a major event that you got finished with. I wonder if we could begin with perhaps a broader picture. People have, I suspect, a wildly inaccurate view of Pacific Island culture, history, and all the gifts that it's provided in terms of world culture, probably driven a lot by marketing of tourism and that sort of thing. Give us a sense of the real breadth and depth of Pacific Island culture that you wish people had a sense of.
Thank you for having me. I just want to say hello and extend a welcome from our organization, UTOPIA Washington, based out of Kent. But like you said, most of what the public understanding of Pacifica culture is from either movies, from tourism, but a large part of it is from history, right? What's taught in this country and what people learn about the history of PI people, Pacific Islander people. And it doesn't just extend to Pacific Islander people, it also extends to the history of Black and Indigenous people in this country, right? We're in a time where there is an increase in legislation banning the teaching of Black history, the teaching of Indigenous history of in this country, right? And sometimes it's at the expense. We see legislation allowing that the history of API people be taught in schools, but it's at the expense of Black and Indigenous people. So when you talk about how public understanding of Pacifica people is based on tourism and promotions, we know that that's a huge part of our history isn't taught in schools and isn't portrayed accurately in movies or in history. In my own personal experience, a lot of our history has been either done by researchers who come to the island who have no connection to the people, researchers such as Margaret Mead, right? And so a lot of our history has been written by people who don't look like us and who don't have a full understanding of our people.
So what would 2 or 3 key points to correct some of those misconceptions be that you'd like to share with people? If you were teaching a class, say with middle school or high school students or college, and you wanted to make a couple of key points in terms of, here are some things that you don't know that I really wish you did, what would those be?
That we're not a monolith, right? Pacific Islander cultures, even though we're all the same people, we have a diverse cultures, customs, practices, and ways of living, right? And I would also like to relay the idea of collectivism in our cultures. And since I work for a LGBT organization, it's important to name that in Pacifica cultures, we have we have these rich histories of gender identities and cultural identities that has service and responsibility at the center of our ways of living.
We'll talk more about that in a minute, but you brought up a point that I thought was very interesting, and that is the collectivism of Pacific Islander culture. And I know one of the books that really garnered a lot of attention recently was Braiding Sweetgrass. And Robin Wall Kimmerer made the point that in a property culture, it's believed that when you own property, you have a bundle of rights. And she said when it's a gift or collective culture, one based on gratitude and sharing, that it's believed that if you have property, it comes with a bundle of responsibilities to others. How does that manifest itself in Pacific Island culture, or at least those elements that speak to your background then?
I am glad you brought that book up. It's a brilliant piece of writing. And as someone who's from American Samoa, which is a territory, colony, a U.S. colony, a place that has the highest concentration of indigenous people with access to land and ownership of land. And I want to name that ownership is a thing now because of colonization, right? And so we have the highest concentration of indigenous people with access to land, and with access to land comes responsibility to that land, and the responsibility to each other. And we live in a country and in a world where responsibility to not just the land but to all life isn't autonomous, right? And if we want to build a future where we can have our basic needs met, we can have housing as a right, healthcare as a right, we need to also understand that it comes with a responsibility to care for not just each other, but for the resources that this planet has to offer us, and that to see this planet as life, right? That needs to be taken care of and not exploited. A lot of what people know about the Pacific Islands is mostly Hawaii, right? When I remember moving here to Washington and having to sacrifice my own identity for familiarity and for comfort. When people would ask me, "Oh, where are you from?" I would say, "I'm from Hawaii," because people did not have a full understanding of how diverse the Pacific region is, and that it took up too much time for me to explain who I was as a Samoan person.
Right.
And I even saw that in talking about my identity as Fa'afine, which is a cultural identity native to Samoa, and having to sacrifice that identity to make it easier for me to explain my transness, right? But luckily we are fortunate enough to live in a state where people understand that there's much more than just trans identity.
Right.
There's still a lot of work to be done, but people understand that we've done the work of elevating two-spirit identities, Fa'afine identities, and identities that exist outside of the Western understanding of gender.
Let's begin to unpack that a little bit and talk about Utopia. Tell us a little bit about what your mission is as part of UTOPIA Washington and how it came to be.
Our mission is to we are actively replacing systems of oppression with ecosystems of care and safety through Black and Brown organizing, prioritizing land and bodily autonomy, and reclaiming our cultural narratives. So that's the new mission. And it comes out of, we had a full week of conversations, of building with the staff. We have a staff of 27 folks, all gender diverse individuals from the Pacific region. And we had conversations around what it looks like to use the privilege that we have, the privilege of having access to our customs, access to our cultural identities, to show up for Black and Brown folks in our community, seeing as we come from a region that is the last place on earth to be colonized. And so we did not have to experience hundreds of years of genocide, of slavery, of I also want to be mindful that the Pacific region has different experiences of colonization, but not as lengthy as Turtle Island and the people from
Right.
stolen people, right, and people with stolen land have experienced.
When you talk about the focus on gay and trans people, how does the place or the surroundings, the circumstances that they find themselves facing here in the continental United States differ from that of their home cultures that they left?
In the Pacific region, we have rich histories of gender identities, right, gender diversity. And so moving to the contiguous U.S., the mainland, as we call it, and having to fight for our identities and fight for our existence. And the difference is like we know who we are and our people know that history, right? And so being here where people deny the history of gender diverse people in Turtle Island, right, in the U.S., it's difficult, right? Because no amount of research, no amount of history being taught in the current political climate is going to convince people about our existence without us actually having a relationship or having a conversation, a real conversation with people, right? And so being in this country where there's so much division, we have to get used to that. So we've built this ecosystem of care and safety within UTOPIA Washington, where we see an influx of Pacific Islander people, not just LGBTQ people, but Pacifica people in general, moving to the Washington State area. And we are going to make sure that we are providing care and keep providing safety for them through community-owned and community-driven initiatives, and such as our Mapumaya Clinic. And we can talk about that a little bit more
I want
later.
to go into detail. Let me ask you this, and that is you made an important point, and that is you're seeing this migration to the mainland. Is that increasing? Has that increased over the past years? And if so, what's driving that?
Well, we're seeing people migrating as a result of as climate refugees, right? Being forced to leave their lands because of climate change, right? And it's the region, we come from a region where that's most impacted by climate change, and the major contributors of climate change are the world powers, right? The U.S., China, and many other world powers. And so folks that are being forced to migrate here in search of more opportunities, in search of land, in search of better health care. Those are some of the reasons. There are more people living outside of the island that are Samoans and living here than back home. And so the work that we do at Utopia is ensuring that our people, even though that we are living here as diaspora, we have a responsibility to our people and ensuring that the people that are back on the island are well taken care of, and that our lands are taken care of as well.
You mentioned some of the programs that you're doing. One was a clinic. Tell us a little bit about your clinic, how that developed, what services it offers, a little bit about the history and extent of it.
So Utopia was established in 2009, and we did not have any working staff until 2017. So that's a huge chunk of time to build capacity and build the organization up to where it is now, to where 5 years later we have 27 staff members. And we have 2 medical directors. We offer gender-affirming care, free gender-affirming care, primary care to folks who don't have access to insurance, to migrants. And we serve the broader LGBTQ community, not just Pacific Islanders, but across Black and Brown communities. And we are sandwiched between two metropolitan areas, Seattle and Tacoma, where a lot of these resources are concentrated. Yet we see a lot of people being displaced to South King County because of high cost of living. And so we're there to meet those communities.
Could you share a story, and again, I know we have to keep names confidential here, but maybe pick one individual that you've really seen the presence of that clinic, the availability of the clinic, how it's made a difference in their life. Any individual stories come to mind on that?
As Utopia, we've always have been sex worker led and sex worker serving since the beginning. And we do some work with supporting sex workers in Aurora, providing them with safety kits, being there physically to provide some sort of safety and also be open to their needs and what they need in the moment and ongoing and as far as what they're experiencing out on the streets. And so we serve street sex workers, but also sex workers that are working outside of their homes. And I would say a success story is we've had sex worker cohorts where we build their leadership around current issues, build stronger networks of community between those folks. And this year we were able to place two of our sex worker members into a program to learn electrolysis, and so they just finished their program, and hopefully in the next year they'll be working at Utopia, providing electrolysis to our community, and being hired by Utopia. So.
Is that early influence of sex workers with the organization, does that reflect the difficulty when people migrate to a new area, that's a way for them to be able to survive in an unfamiliar climate then?
Yes, and I don't think it's just, I guess, a unique experience to people migrating from the Pacific region, but to people migrating from all over the world. And it's not a unique experience to people who live here, right? Who come from impoverished communities, from over-policed communities, and communities where there are no access to their basic needs being met. And so they use sex work as a way to supplement their income to be able to provide not just for themselves, but their families, right?
We have heard, and I think one particular group is politicizing the issue quite a bit, and that is gay and trans people, the portrayal of gay and trans people, and trying to make it an issue to alienate and marginalize people. What would you say to people that are out listening to us right now in terms of misunderstandings that they have about gay and trans people, particularly transgender people, because we've heard so much about that, efforts to restrict them from participating in sports, restricting books depicting their experiences. What would you say to people that you'd like them to understand about that?
The conversation around sports is a lot more nuanced, and people tend to focus on trans bodies. And we've seen the progression of folks the same people who have targeted trans people in sports have been the same people who have targeted LGBTQ people in this country around access to marriage equality, access to public spaces. And so it's not about sports, it's about erasing LGBTQ people, right? And when I think about trans people, or any group of people that's policed for their proximity to femininity, and that's all LGBTQ people, that's all femme folks, or anybody who is not a able-bodied person, who is not a cis white hetero person. If trans people did not exist, it doesn't mean that the issues that currently exist within sports or within access to safe spaces for women in prisons, in public spaces, restrooms, it doesn't mean those issues won't go away.
Right.
They've existed before trans people were even a topic of conversation in this country.
When we were preparing for this program, we had a conversation, and I believe one of the elements that came up as part of that conversation was at the far western part of the Pacific, New Guinea. And there are some real problems for the indigenous people of New Guinea versus others that are coming in. Could you broaden our perspective, let us know what that issue is as well?
As far as Papua New Guinea, West Papua has been fighting for sovereignty and has been facing mass genocide at the hands of the Indonesian government and Indonesian militia. And there have been numerous calls to action for Australia to step in, for the UN to step in, and over the past few decades, and nothing has been done, right? And so we continue to elevate their stories and to push for support from these world powers who are focused more on opportunity, right, and in the way it provides aid to different countries.
As we sit here talking, and as we're videotaping this and recording it, they're still searching for remains of victims on Maui in the Lahaina area, part of the Pacific Island area of the Pacific, which I think I looked up, and it encompasses 60 million square miles. It's a huge area, but it would seem difficult for us not to address that issue. The fact that there were these fires, there was not proper warning put out, and the extent of the damage, does that speak to you at all in terms of the relationship toward Native cultures, the Pacific Islands in particular, and if so, how?
We've seen it's heartbreaking to see what's happening in Lahaina and on the island of Maui, and just seeing how indigenous people who have worked hard to build a community and to hold on to a community that was always under threat of removal, right? We know the history of Hawaii, the kingdom of Hawaii being overthrown and taken against their will by the U.S. government, and we've seen, numerous apologies from different administrations for that extraction, and we've seen that continue over the course of the history with Mauna Kea, with seeing how the 1% have more control of indigenous land in Hawaii than its own people, and that's forcing people to migrate to the U.S., right? As far as Lahaina, I do want to acknowledge that disasters and threats to communities, Black and brown communities, have always been used as an opportunity to land grab, to take away land from indigenous people. And I think there's a lack of disaster preparedness when it comes to Native communities, not just thinking about Lahaina, but also thinking about the recent typhoons in Guahan or Guam, or the tsunami that hit Samoa and Tonga. There is a lack of disaster preparedness until after the fact, right? And so there is a lack of resources that goes to protecting Native communities, regardless of whether they're federally recognized or not, right?
Let us, as we wrap this up, come back to the original focus, and that is that of Utopia. As people watching or listening to this would maybe like to help, how could they do so? What would you ask of them?
It's always good to have resources, right? I guess whether it's funds or donations, but it means more for us to see you and meet you and hopefully have you get engaged in the work that we do. Money's great, but I think the connection and getting folks to be familiarized with the work that we do and to give back to the people that their funds would be supporting, right? And actually being able to hear and have a real relationship to the people that those funds would be going out to through services. But there are numerous ways you can help. We have a community farm. So twice a month, we're always looking for volunteers to help us with the farm. It's in Auburn. This farm helps provide fresh produce for our communities at free cost, no cost. We have our clinic, free clinic. We're always looking for volunteers. We're also looking for volunteers to support with our youth program and our elder program, but there's many different ways people can get involved.
Angaya Tupu, thank you so much for participating in our program on this, and I'm sure the people are going to respond to this. And I think, as you put it very eloquently, that just that opportunity for them to meet you and for you to meet them just can really develop new opportunities and a new dynamic that's needed very much. So thank you much. Much success to you and your colleagues at UTOPIA Washington then.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us on this edition of Challenge 2.0. We hope you'll join us again next week.